Will you be tweeting differently once you board the Air Force One? No, that's other people that do that. I don't. I'm very consistent. I'm a very stable genius. Actually, this was the first time the president said it. The last time was in a tweet. A stable genius, which I guess is Einstein if he owned a comb, I think. Desi Lydic did not begin the reality check with a dramatic medical chart. She began with a highlighter. Behind her, the screen showed Donald Trump repeating the familiar story. His sharp mind, his perfect performance, the doctors who were impressed, and the critics who supposedly could never handle his brilliance. The audience laughed because they had heard the rhythm before. Trump was not merely saying he felt healthy. He was turning one medical screening into another chapter of the genius brand. Desi let the clip finish. Then she held up the highlighted page and said, "Before we build a statue for the test, let's read what the test is." The studio quieted. She read the line slowly. The Montreal Cognitive Assessment is a brief screening tool for cognitive impairment. The audience roared. That was the first hit. But why did a 10-minute medical screening need to become a historic milestone? What was the hidden gap between the medical reality and the public broadcast? The studio lights shifted. The laughter from the audience faded into a sudden, deep silence. This wasn't just a political joke anymore. It was a live dissection of a psychological pattern that has defined an entire era of leadership. A pattern that relies entirely on one core rule: never let reality get in the way of a perfectly constructed brand. Desi looked down at her desk, letting the tension breathe for a beat. The screen behind her kept running the loop. Trump's face, his hand gestures, the undeniable confidence radiating from the screen. At this point, Desi said, leaning forward into the microphone, I'm not even sure there was even a test. I feel like there's a good chance the president was just watching Zootopia. You know what? Maybe small business owners aren't the best audience for Donald Trump's animal facts. Is there an audience that's closer to his intellectual level? The screen cut directly to another clip. This time, it wasn't a rally. It was an official briefing room. The atmosphere was heavy, professional, filled with journalists holding recording devices waiting for policy announcements. Instead, they received a detailed breakdown of how to identify an elephant. Desi made the boundary clear. She was not mocking age, health, memory, doctors, or families who take cognitive screening seriously. Those exams can matter. They can bring relief. They can point doctors toward deeper questions, but they are not IQ tests, not genius certificates, and not proof that a leader has wisdom, judgment, or discipline. Trump wanted the word aced to sound like brilliance. Desi made the word screening sound like context. For viewers over 65, the moment landed instantly. Many had sat across from a doctor while simple questions carried serious meaning. Some had repeated words, drawn clocks, named animals, or watched a loved one do the same. They knew passing mattered. They also knew passing did not turn the waiting room into Harvard. But Trump wasn't talking to doctors anymore. He was talking to history. Then Desi put 3 Trump phrases on the screen in massive, bold typography. Very stable genius, perfect score, aced it. Beside them, in a small, clinical, unadorned font, she placed the plain medical definition again. Brief screening tool. The visual contradiction was staggering. It was the ultimate manifestation of modern political branding, taking an assessment meant to detect severe neurological decline and presenting it to the free world as if it were a doctoral thesis defense at Oxford. Anybody running for president or vice president should take a cognitive test. The screen flashed to a newer clip of Trump speaking at an outdoor podium, wind rustling his hair, his voice booming through the speakers. So, I've taken 3. No president, think of this, has ever taken one. The camera cut back to Desi. She blinked once, twice. Kind of a weird flex, she noted, her voice dropping into a conversational, almost sympathetic whisper. It's like bragging about being the only kid in school who gets a special helper. The contrast was almost unfair because the definition did not need attitude. On one side was a man inflating the result. On the other was a medical description calmly refusing to become a trophy. Desi pointed to the screen and said, "This is not Mensa. This is the doctor making sure the dashboard lights are not blinking." The room exploded. That became the second hit. But here is where the deeper mystery begins. Why does this strategy work? Why does a crowd of thousands hear a man brag about remembering 5 words in order, Person, woman, man, camera, TV, and erupt into cheers? To understand the escalation, you have to look closely at the mechanism of the boast itself. Desi explained that the test was only one example of Trump's larger habit. He takes something entirely ordinary and stretches it, bends it, inflates it until it sounds historic, monumental, and entirely unprecedented. A standard crowd becomes the biggest ever assembled in human history. A routine diplomatic phone call becomes completely perfect. A basic trade agreement becomes the greatest deal anyone has ever seen. And a brief precautionary medical screening becomes absolute proof that every single critic, journalist, and political opponent is completely stupid. The laughter in the studio grew quieter because the pattern was no longer funny. It was serious. Desi stopped smiling. The pacing shifted from rapid-fire comedy to a steady, deliberate march. She argued that true leadership depends entirely on the ability to describe reality accurately. If every normal result has to become spectacular, then facts are no longer facts. They lose their weight. They lose their meaning. They become nothing more than cheap decorations for an insatiable ego. And when a leader demands applause for decoration, citizens lose track of what is real and what is packaging. She picked up the highlighted page again. The paper rustled against the microphone. She did not look at the cameras. She looked directly at the words written by medical professionals years ago. Brief screening tool. She did not add a joke. She did not need one. The silence in the room did the work for her. Suddenly, a graphic flashed on screen behind her. It was an imagined response written in all capital letters, written in the exact cadence of a late-night social media post, calling Desi failing, jealous, nasty, fake, desperate, and dishonest. Desi read the line, folded the page meticulously, and smiled a cold, sharp smile. "We asked for a definition," she said, and somehow received a tantrum with punctuation. The studio erupted again, the sound bouncing off the walls, but Desi didn't let the energy dissipate into simple entertainment. She immediately lowered her voice, forcing the audience to lean in, capturing their attention completely. She said a good medical result should always be welcomed. There is absolutely nothing wrong with saying doctors found no cause for concern. In fact, it should be a moment of quiet relief for the entire country, regardless of political affiliation. The problem, the real danger, begins when that medical result is weaponized. When the test stops being a health report and starts being a club to hit opponents with, everything changes. Journalists who ask basic questions become low IQ. Policy experts who disagree on economics become overrated. Comedians who point out the absurdity become talentless. Anyone who refuses to step inside the genius frame is instantly accused of attacking the man himself. The room grew completely still. The micro-tension had reached its peak. The comedy had stripped away entirely, leaving behind a raw, psychological truth. Then Desi delivered the line that froze the entire segment. A secure mind can accept context. An insecure brand has to sue the dictionary. Nobody moved. For one entire second, there was total stillness. Then a thunderous wave of applause broke out across the room. Desi placed the highlighted page flat on the desk, letting her hands rest on top of it. Behind her, the phrase "very stable genius" remained frozen on the massive screen, illuminated in stark white light. The picture told the entire story. A man can pass a screening. A man can be medically cleared by the finest physicians in the world. A man can still exaggerate what that result proves until the brag itself becomes infinitely more revealing than the test ever was. For older viewers watching at home, that specific distinction mattered immensely. They respected health. They knew the vulnerability of aging. They respected the medical profession and the gravity of cognitive testing. But they also recognized high-pressure salesmanship when they saw it. This wasn't a matter of national reassurance anymore. This was a corporate marketing campaign built from a routine medical checkup. Then came the final line. "Passing a cognitive screening can be good news," Desi said, her voice steady and clear. "Turning it into a genius commercial is why America keeps asking for the fine print." The audience stood up from their seats. By the very end of the segment, Desi had not needed a leaked medical record. She didn't need a secret score, a hidden audio file, or anonymous sources from inside the Walter Reed Medical Center. She used nothing but Trump's own public boasts and one plain, undeniable sentence of medical context. Trump called it unprecedented genius. Desi simply read the label on the box and suddenly, the magnificent crown looked significantly less like proof of intellectual supremacy, and much more like a shiny sticker handed out from a doctor's office, catching the light under the studio lamps before the screen finally went black. And the crowd finally saw the difference for itself on camera.